So our presentation today is on pricing and cost analysis. We're going to focus on sublimation, but really everything that we talk about applies to just about every form of digital printing. So just a few modifications of some of the categories and things that you see here. This could actually apply to a lot of different other processes that you may or may not be using. So please keep that in mind as we go. So pricing begins with understanding your operational costs. People ask me all the time, well, hey, what would you charge for this? But that's not a good question because there's not a straightforward answer. There's a lot of things that go into figuring out what you should charge for something. And that always starts with what's your operational cost and how does that translate into the cost of producing something. So we really have to step way back from that actual product you're trying to sell when we're starting to talk about what is the selling price. We got to understand the true cost of printing in order to be able to begin to set any kind of legitimate pricing, okay? So too many people, I find this over and over again, too many people focus on trying to sell a selling price without knowing what the cost is to produce that particular product. A lot of this is going to be not just what does it cost to produce the product, but then there's another part that goes with this too. And your margin itself becomes based on perception of value. And what do I mean by that? You know, a lot of people just want to put a simple margin in like 100% once they do figure out the cost. But the reality is every different market, different geographical regions and whatnot, they see things differently in value. And how someone sees the value of something is what drives the margin. Your cost is your cost, okay? But your margin is probably a lot more flexible because that's going to be based on worth, value of that particular product. So there's a lot that's going to go hand in hand. We're really going to focus on cost more than anything else here today, but your marketing strategies is where you start talking about how to raise the perceived value of something so that you can get a higher margin. Now, digital printing costs. Let's focus on that for a few minutes. What is the main cost factor with digital printing? Most people would say the ink, but that's not really the case when you look at the big picture in terms of everything that goes into production, because there's a lot of variables here. Okay. Now, why is ink assumed to be the top cost? Okay. You get in discussions with people and they're all the time start talking about ink cost, this, that, and the other. Well, you know, ink shows up frequently, we hope, okay, in your financial records, because if it shows up frequently, that means you are doing a lot of printing. But it comes up as recurring costs, so it's very visible. And because it may be, if you're buying multiple cartridges of ink at the same time, several $100s, it's going to catch your attention. And when you see something like that jumping out at you, you start kind of thinking, that's where my greatest cost of printing really is. But when you break it down to what it actually costs to print something, as far as true ink cost on an actual graphic printed, you're going to find that it's very, very low in cost, and it's really a small percentage of the overall cost of production, as you'll see as we go here. So your production costs go way beyond just ink. You have to take into account media if you're doing any type of transfers. You have to deal with the media, the paper. You have to deal with the different supplies that may be involved with the job. You have to involve with administrative costs that may be assigned with that particular job. Then you have to deal with the substrate costs. You have to deal with labor. So there's a lot of things that go straight into production, just the production aspect of actually printing something. You know, all 5 things here, and then there's subcategories of these things, can have an impact on your production cost. But it goes beyond that because you also have to look at your operational cost. All these operational costs associated with your business have to be paid for. Therefore, if you look at it in reverse, all of your operational costs actually contribute to the cost of producing something. And you have to think about things like the paychecks and taxes, maybe car expenses, you know, if you're writing that off, okay, if that's a legitimate expense, office supplies and rent and utilities and advertising, ink costs for experimentation. So yeah, we're back to ink again, right? And the cost of producing samples. So you have a lot of ongoing costs all the time, and they all contribute to your overhead. And your overhead is what is really going to drive what it costs to produce something. If you had an overhead of, say, $100 a day, every day, and you were only producing 4 items a day, then your overhead factor is $25 per item, okay, if you only did 4 items per day. So the reality is everything that you sell, everything that you produce has to pay back some of your operational costs as well as your production costs. And then anything above that, hopefully, is going into your pocket. Okay, so that's what we want to aim for. Now, time is money. Okay, that's where your real costs are. Now, I know when you're first starting out, if it's just you and some equipment, in a spare room or your garage or your basement, you're not too worried about time. You're just worried about getting it right and getting more sales. And I understand that. But down the road, as you build this business, and if you ever want this business to give you a real paycheck, you do have to understand the value of time. Because once your business does get to the point where it could be full-time for you, a new career per se, then you have to look at all those time factors, because that's what's going to kill you in cost. Trust me, okay? I know this. I started as an embroiderer and I saw it there, okay? And I see it in digital and everywhere else. So let me just give you an example so you can better understand the time factor. And we're going to use here a t-shirt that we're going to sublimate. And in this case, I'm going to use the Ricoh 3110 printer using Sublimate R ink. So I like to define the variables. We're going to do an 8-inch by 10-inch full color image on a Poly Performance T. So you can see that image that we're going to do right here on the right-hand side as a reference. So let's see what that costs for me to put on there, okay? Now, let's presume, for sake of argument here, that my cost of operation is $30 per hour, which is 50 cents a minute, which is easy math. Let's say my printing speed is 1 minute and my heat press speed is 1 minute. Okay, so my true production, not including my artwork, in fact, if somebody already gave me this design already made, I really don't have much artwork time other than pulling up the file and printing it out. And to be honest, my print speed is going to be a little faster than 1 minute, and because it's on a shirt, my pressing speed is a little bit faster. So we're going to use 2 minutes just for purposes here. Reality, depending on the variables, it might be 3, 4, or 5 minutes. Okay, I understand that. We're just going to use 2 here. Easy math. That's where we want to be. We're in a seminar. Easy math. Okay, so what's your production cost? If your production cost, or excuse me, cost of operation is 50 cents a minute, and it took you 2 minutes to create something, your production cost is $1. Okay, so it cost me $1. Okay, based on that 50 cents per minute. But we have all these other little variables now that go into it. That was true production time. Okay. But we do have some other downtime associated with the job. For example, let's say our setup to get things going. Okay, maybe it is an artwork in this case. Or maybe we're having trouble finding the file and getting it up on the screen. But let's say that we actually spent 5 minutes getting ready to do the actual production. Okay, because every job has downtime. Think about that. So if my setup time was 5 minutes at 50 cents a minute, my setup cost me $2.50. The clock doesn't stop ticking on overhead just because you're not printing and pressing something. That's there every minute, 50 cents in this case. So once we finish and we open up the heat press, we're going to rip off that paper, toss it aside. We're going to pull that shirt out, go stretch it out somewhere so that we can allow it to cool down the right way. Maybe we have a piece of paper we have to fill out, our post-production notes on our work order or whatnot. And let's say we spent 5 minutes, in processing this job at 50 cents a minute. That's another $2.50. So when this totals up, it came out to $6. That's 1 hour of true production time, and then 10 minutes worth of downtime. $6 now is what it cost me to produce that shirt, not including the cost of the shirt. My ink cost for this job, I can tell you, was 42 cents. And my media cost, if I use 1 sheet of paper, 20 cents. So it came out to 62 cents or so. But if you're just looking at the ink cost by itself, 42 cents. But yet my production cost was $6. So if I wanted to save money on this job, would I look for cheaper ink, or would I look to shave out some of that downtime? If it was me, I would be working on shaving out that downtime. Okay. So as I said, the ink costs for this were approximately 42 cents, which was 7% of the overall production cost, not including the blank shirt. So the reality, when you look at how ink is used per item, it's fairly low cost. But I agree, when you have to go out and buy multiple cartridges, you're looking at a big cost there. A simple rule of thumb for sublimation ink, not necessarily DTG or some of the other processes, is about a penny per square inch. And I'll be honest with you, the new Virtuoso printers are actually lower in cost than that. But penny per square inch is easy math, even though it is getting cheaper. Okay, so you can use that as a quick reference if you ever need to use it. And that's just ink. That didn't include necessarily the paper. Okay, so managing your production costs. A lot of different ways to do that, okay? If you look at a per job basis, on each job, you're going to have ink and paper, you're going to have that production time, and you're going to have your substrate procurement. And to be honest, you're probably not going to be able to do much with your ink and paper, but the reality is that's the smallest percentage of your cost right there. Your production time is typically the largest, but sometimes it's the substrate, depending on what you're doing. Our substrates can be quite pricey. Doesn't mean that's bad. That just means that's what it costs to get a good product. So we want to always be paying close attention to all the different factors that we can control. And in a few minutes when we go into the spreadsheet, you'll see a lot of different factors in there where we really try to work through all these things that we're talking about here, okay? So bulk buying, okay? I know we don't all have the budget to go out and have a warehouse full of things. I understand that. But I always do encourage people that when you're looking at buying products, look at what makes sense. So there's some things you could probably inventory. And if you're going to inventory something, you want to make sure it's something that you can turn around and sell pretty quick. You don't want to be stuck with inventory. But on the other hand, if you're doing a tremendous amount of coffee mugs and you're using the same style over and over again, there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of price breaks that come with larger quantities, or sometimes there's sale prices that you can get a really good deal. So if you go ahead and buy in larger quantities, you will get lower prices. Now, you don't go out and buy in large quantities just because it's a great price, because if it's something you don't move very fast and it's going to sit there on the shelf, and it's really costing you money if you're not turning the inventory pretty quick. So you want to keep that in mind. But definitely always be looking at some of these price breaks. And then you kind of use that in reverse too. When you're pricing out to the customer, a lot of times you can pass on a good price break to them if they buy in a larger quantity. So I mean, they're just different things to think about, when you're buying. So definitely consider the bulk buying for things that you sell frequently that you can turn over pretty quick. Along those same lines, you can find a lower cost for the shipping for the substrates when you're buying larger, okay? So that's something else to keep in mind, that you can get lower shipping costs, because you'll find that the shipping rate per pound drops as the quantity increases, because it's really cheaper to ship one large order than multiple small ones, okay? So that's something to keep in mind when you are ordering. So another advantage of buying in bulk is your shipping rate per item goes down. And it's important to always remember that, because getting that merchandise in your hand, you have the merchandise cost and the shipping cost too. So pay attention to that. And then, of course, increasing your efficiency by reducing your downtime can yield really, really good cost savings. So being able to focus on it and say, what is taking the most time? How can I be more efficient in the way I run things? And part of that becomes staging your work. So when you start talking about staging your work, that means that you can have a little better control on maximizing your run time. Most of us, if you get a job, you just run it, okay? Now, let's say on what you see on the screen was one job, okay? And you see there's a shirt and there's a mouse pad and all this other single items. You're going to spend a lot of time setting your heat press settings differently, because you have to deal with different thicknesses and different dwell times and really different temperatures, because typically when you're doing apparel, you're doing it at a lower temperature. So that means you have downtime waiting on the heat press to warm up, cool down to the new temperature settings. You're constantly adjusting the pressure settings depending on the thickness of what you're working with, and then it may be some different times that you have to program in. So the reality is this can actually take a long time. On the other hand, if you take a couple of different orders and you look for like items within those different orders and then schedule all those like items together. In other words, do all your shirts, then do all your metals, then do all your ceramics, then do all of your mouse pads or whatever, okay? The point being is you're able to keep the same press settings even though you're working through different pieces on different orders. You're using the same press settings because you're doing the same pieces, the same types of pieces, one behind the other. Now, let me show you better what I mean by all that, okay? Take everything that comes in and try to look at maybe a couple of days worth of work. And you take your orders and you list out your orders and then look how you can break them down. And that, for me, with sublimation, my first level of breakdown is by the thickness, because different thickness of items means changing that setting on my heat press. Then I also look at material because, for example, metals, besides the fact they're thinner, but I'd like to have, make sure that it's the same temperature setting for the same material. And metals can be photo panels, it can be phone covers, it can be dog tags. There's a lot of different metals out there that are still the same thickness, same types of settings. So you can think of metals almost as a simple standard group. And then I'll look down at size because ideally I'm going to put, if it's small things, as many things under the heat press at one time as I can, because that gives me more efficiency by doing multiple things at the same time. Okay, so that's kind of how I break things down. So I want to look at the jobs that come in, and here's an example we can use. Let's say that we have 3 customers, client A, B, and C. And let's say that client A, he ordered 12 shirts, 6 wood plaques, 6 iPhone covers, and 6 metal license plates. Client B got 6 wood plaques, 6 license plates, and 6 mouse pads. And client C got some shirts, some plaques, and some phone covers. Now, if I did each client individually, I will be bouncing around a little bit in some of my settings and incurring maybe some extra downtime. On the other hand, maybe I can schedule it this way, do all the phone covers together, and I can probably put multiple phone covers, even on a smaller, printer and press setup, I can probably get 6 phone covers at a time, okay? So that becomes 3 cycles to get that done. Then I go to the metal license plates. There's different types of phone covers, but some of the phone covers are metal. So here I put metal to metal. When I go to a wooden plaque, it's thicker. Okay, so I'm going to have to open up the heat press. Probably the same settings otherwise, but I got to open up the heat press. Then I can go to the mouse pads, which are a little bit thinner and smell bad too. And then finally T-shirts, which have their own settings. Okay, so this is the way I would try to schedule it out. Okay, this way, because I'm going to get more efficiency doing this. Yeah, I got to take care of the artwork, and if it's a whole lot of personalization, it may be a little tough on the artwork. But in general, when I'm running orders, if I can think this way, I will get a little bit more efficient. Now, I figured this out a long time ago, and and I did this, in the early days, and I like to keep things simple. Okay, and people sometimes laughed at my simplicity. It worked really well. So we use a lot of paper. And some people are against paper. But the reality is, let's say, remember client A had multiple things. So let's just go back and look at that for a minute. Okay, client A, they had 1, 2, 3, 4 different products. So this is one job for client A, but it's really 4 separate jobs. You see what I'm saying? It's like 4 separate sub-jobs. So if I have a master work order and I make 4 copies of it, that's very simple to do. And that's kind of what I'm doing here, except I have 5 listed on here. But the point being is I take that master and then I make a copy for each subgroup of that particular job, okay? And then I like to do is physically separate out. And believe it or not, I use laundry baskets. I mean, people like to use cardboard boxes, whatever. Why do I use laundry baskets? Because you can see inside them, okay? It makes it a lot easier to know what's in there to have stuff in a laundry basket. That's why I use them, and they're cheap too, okay? You can get really cheap laundry baskets. And we have rows of metal shelves with the laundry baskets on there, and the reality is I take up client A, I break his job down into multiple things by all the categorization I just showed you, and then I tape on the front, very simple, that paper, and I've highlighted which part of that work order is in that basket. And then I can group the baskets not by who they belong to, but the type of substrate that's in them. You see how then I'm able to group things? So I have all my T-shirts over here, and I have all the baskets full of wooden plaques over here. And so then when we go from one type of product to the next, we just go grab the baskets. But the basket is also, because it has a worker on the front, tells me who these particular pieces in this basket go to. So if I do the items that belong to client A and get his 4 knocked out, I put them right back in his basket. Okay, when I'm done, and then I grab the basket of the next person who's got the same, type of items too. Maybe it's more wooden plaques. We go on through it. So I think you get the gist of what I'm saying here. My idea is to keep things going. You make money, you're efficient when the heat press is closed and you're actually sublimating. Okay, heat press is open, you quit making money. Well, you still got to do all the other parts. But what I'm getting at is when you're producing, you're making money. When you have downtime, you're not. So this is what you need to use, that type of thought process to steer you, okay? All right, so the whole purpose here is the pricing. And that's where we're going to go. We're going to talk about building a cost-based pricing system. I wanted to show you what some of your costs were so you understand as we go through this particular spreadsheet where I'm coming from. Okay, that's why I went through this exercise. Yeah, I showed you some things to make yourself a little more efficient and whatnot, but that all ties into your pricing as you're getting ready to see. Okay, because the pricing must be based on production and operational cost. Starts off by knowing the true cost of printing or production, and then you can work from there to start figuring out what your baseline is for being able to work in things like margins. Okay, so we're going to take a look at how that's done. Just real quick, that's my contact information. If you have questions later after this particular presentation, feel free to email me there. I'll leave it up there for just 1 minute, and then I'm going to switch over to a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. Now, the spreadsheet you're getting ready to see, I've made it available for download for years, and a lot of people have downloaded it and used it, modified it. You can modify it all you want, okay? I didn't lock anything into it. If you download it, it's yours. Do what you want with it. If you mess it up, you download it again. It's been on the website, and I will make sure it's back up on the website if it's not, and so that you'll be able to access it there under our webcast library. Okay. All right. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to switch over to the spreadsheet. So let's see. We're going to possibly make your screen go blank for just a second there, and pull this up. Let's move this. Okay, so now you should be looking at a whole bunch of numbers, okay? As we go through this, keep in mind that this is an informational, educational tool that I'm getting ready to show you. The numbers you see in here you may disagree with, and it's okay because I don't know what the numbers are for your business. Most of the numbers you'll see are round numbers in real life. Running a business, we don't have a lot of round numbers. So just keep that in mind as we go through. It's to show you concepts and principles and things rather than to say this is an exact number that you have to abide by. Now, I will zoom in just a little bit if it'll let me. Let's see. And you can probably zoom your own screen potentially. So we're going to use a small shop here, okay? And as I said earlier, if you do other things like DTG and digital transfers and whatnot that involve printing, okay, digital printing, then you can work with this exact same thing that we have here. There's very few things you really have to change. It works pretty good across the board, okay? So our first aspect here, I'm going to make it a little bit larger just so it's good on your screen, is to kind of figure out what does it cost to run your business, your overhead aspect. And what I try to do is figure out all of your costs over 1 year and then kind of work backwards from there. Now, if you're new to the business, you haven't been in business a year, you don't know what they are. So just keeping it simple up here, I put in some select categories. You can see that I have a monthly column and a yearly column. A lot of them you pay monthly, but I want everything in a yearly format. That's why you see that. You know, some of your expenses may be annual, semi-annual, quarterly, whatever, not just monthly, okay? Ultimately, I want to see it into the yearly factor, okay? Under type, where you see F and V, F is fixed, V is variable. You do have variable costs. You have to take that into account. Part of building this out is you're kind of creating budgets too. If you think about it, you're really creating budgets in different categories, so you can come back, and you should come back routinely and see what did I really spend versus what did I forecast my spending to be. Things will change. You know, for example, as your business grows and you're producing more, you will spend more money in things like ink and paper. It's a fact of life because you're producing more products. You'll see other things in here probably go up as well as your business increases. But business isn't good. Some of it may go down, but some of it being fixed in place won't ever change. So your variables are probably going to change, and your fixed are probably going to stay where they are regardless of what your sales look like. So just kind of keep these things in mind as you go. The very bottom one here is my favorite one. It's owner's draw or a paycheck. Now, just because you put it in there doesn't mean you'll make it. The reality for me is when I look at the overhead should include me getting paid because I think that I'm the most important part in the business. So at least if I calculate my paycheck as part of my operational cost, I have a shot at maybe making it one day. Provided if I don't have the sales, I'm not going to get it. I'm the last to get paid. But if you don't even factor in a paycheck, you may find out that you're underpricing your products and you really never get paid because you didn't take that into account. So I put it into account here. Now, if it scares you, you can see that I can take it out to Spreadsheet. I have it at $3,500 a month. I'm going to put 0 in there just for a minute and watch the numbers in green change. So my overhead just dropped to $15,600 per year. So by not paying me, hey, my overhead just really goes down. But what good was that, right? So I put the $3,500 back in. So my estimated annual operational costs here are $57,600. As you work through this spreadsheet, the numbers you see in blue are numbers that you need to put in there as they apply to you, and numbers in green are calculated. And you may want to insert more categories here. If you don't know how to use a spreadsheet, learn. Okay, it's one of the most valuable tools a business owner can have. All right, so let's move this down a little bit. Let's say that based on this number here, this is my annual operational costs. And how many weeks are you going to work out of the year? I'm going to start with a weekly cost. If you work 48 weeks, that means you got 2 weeks of vacation and 10 business holidays. It comes out to $1,200 a week. On a 5-day work week, that's $240 a day. On an 8-hour day, that's $30 per hour. That's what it works out to. Now, if you're working 16 hours a day, don't put 16 hours a day because it will drop that hourly cost of operations because it'll spread it out over 16 hours. But when you go to build your actual pricing off of that basis, you'll have to work 16 hours every day. Not good. You want here is what you want to work, not what you might actually be working. Okay, so keep that part in perspective. All right, so my hourly cost of operations for this particular example came up to $30, a nice round simple number. Then on just a simple kind of bird's eye view, if we looked at let's say we had the ability to produce one item each time we printed and pressed one item. Okay, I didn't take into account the size or anything. I just said one item per cycle. If I did one item per cycle and my average print press cycle was 2 minutes, and I was able to achieve 50 minutes per hour, and you'll never be able to get 60 minutes per hour. 50 is kind of extreme because you have downtime that's legitimate and you have unplanned downtime or whatever else. I'm just using this as a quick example. That means you could do 25 pieces per hour, so your minimum cost to print and press one item was $1.20, regardless of what the item is. We get kind of hung up in, well, you know, a coaster is worth this versus a metal photo panel is worth that. Okay, that's different. I'm talking about the cost to actually produce it. In fact, you might price yourself out when you look at this and find out that, you know, your costs are way too high. Okay, that's okay. This is just a really quick, simple overview. We're going to get deeper here so that you can really play with numbers. So don't get too wrapped up in what you see there. Okay, that's just a quick example to get you going. Okay, all right. So let's go over now though and drill down. Okay. Let's really look at this on a lot closer. So this is the sheet you're really interested in. The tab down here calls the complete job. It has all the pretty colors on it too. So if your average print and press time was a minute and a half plus half a minute to swap something out, that came out to 2 minutes. Again, you may feel like this is just the way I've set it up for discussion. I'm not telling you you should be doing it that fast. Every job's a little different. You want to figure out averages. What is it on average? If it takes you an average of 5 minutes to print and press something, then by gosh, put 5 minutes in there, okay? Always keep in mind that things like artwork, a lot of times I treat separately. Sometimes artwork incurs art charges. Now, if you're using like our new product, the Creative Studio system, which is really simplified artwork, you can move along pretty well. But the reality is, if artwork is part of all this, that's okay, put it in there, okay? Whatever you need, and I'm trying to give you room for that a little bit further down right here, okay? So this is going to give me the ability right here on my setup and pre-production time to put that artwork in there. So back up here, you're probably just going to focus on printing and pressing because that's our production. And then over here on the job information and the setup, that's probably where your artwork program's in. So I like to keep them kind of split apart because it gives me more ease to focus on, you know, where my numbers are, okay? And this one was important. Pieces per print press cycle, I got 1. Okay, if you're doing something big, you probably get 1 at a time, right? But this is a calculator. This isn't just a spreadsheet, it's a calculator. If I was printing and pressing 6 items at a time and I put that in there, it'll change the numbers all the way down the page because of the fact that one print press cycle will yield 6 pieces instead of 1. So in other words, you're going to find, and I'm going to show this to you on another sheet, you're going to find that when you're dealing with quantity orders, that on the smaller stuff you become really efficient because you have more pieces per cycle. Okay, so let's say we have a real job here to play with. Let's say it's a 12-piece job, and whatever it is, it's 1 piece per cycle. And here I have my 15 minutes of setup and pre-production time, and I actually put 15 minutes on the post side. Remember, I got 12 pieces. So, I mean, those 12 pieces I'm laying out as they come off the press, and once it's all done, I have to do something with them. Maybe I have to box them up, get them ready for the customer, do the paperwork. Maybe 15 minutes is extreme. That's up to you, okay? You figure that out, okay? All right, so my calculated production time for one print and press, and this is calculated for you because it's in green, was 2 minutes. Then I threw in an unexpected downtime. I just did it by percentage of 10%. I mean, I don't know what it is. The phone rang, okay? I had to go get some more water because I was thirsty, whatever. So your realistic production time for one run production time, okay? 2.2 minutes. That gives me 27.3 runs per hour. And since it's 1 piece at a time, that means I'm going to get 27.3 pieces per hour. Now, the time to print and press only was 26.4 minutes because it's 12 pieces. See, I set this up for a real quantity. Based on all those parameters, it took 26.4 minutes to print and press that job. To print and press that job. The actual time to produce the job takes into account pre-production and post-production. And that's 30 minutes right there by itself, plus the 26.4, it comes out to 0.9 hours, okay? So 1 hour for all practical purposes because of all that downtime. Now, if my overhead was $30 per hour, and that came from that first sheet that we were looking at, and it took me 0.9 hours to do it, then the total cost to produce this job is $28.20. I didn't even tell you what the substrate was. It's $28.20 was my production cost, or the production cost per piece came out to $2.35. Because if it took me that long to do 12 pieces, it's going to cost each piece cost me $2.35 to produce, not including substrate cost. I haven't put that in there yet, but that's all my operational overhead cost. Okay, everything there. Now let's say the substrate, whatever it was, cost me $3. That was the price that I had to pay, and then I had to ship it. Let's say shipping was $9.95. So those 12 pieces, I got to divide $9.95 against 12 pieces. That's 83 cents a piece. So each item really cost me $3.83 to get it in my hands. $2.35 to decorate it. So the total cost per piece was $6.18. If I wanted 150% margin because I felt like that the perceived value was high enough to get 150%, then my price per piece is $15.45. Okay. Now here's something interesting. That's $6.18 right there. Okay. That $6.18 came from production cost versus substrate cost, and the production cost came out of my overhead. Remember on my overhead sheet, I had my paycheck. So in theory, at $6.18, if I had enough sales, I could actually pay myself from that price point, okay? Because I built in getting paid. That's only as good as me having enough sales to keep things going constantly, right? But you never sell it for that. You look at what can I actually get from it? What's it worth to the customer? That's where you figure out your markup on top of everything else, and that's where you come at that final price. I don't know what this item is. I purposely didn't identify the item. It comes down to what is the item, what's on the item, and who is it targeted to, and that's all going to help you figure out what's it really worth. That's the hardest part. We really can't come up with a mathematical formula to say what's it worth. We can only come up with a mathematical formula to say what does it cost to produce, okay, which is what we're doing here. All right, but if you're looking at this and you're saying, for example, this production cost was way too high because maybe it was coasters, okay? So maybe I had 12 coasters here, but I should be able to print at least 6 per cycle. So let's put 6 in here. And we'll see that my cost now is $1.43 per piece. So that went down significantly. Okay, it went down to $1.43. It still feels too high. Okay, so I'm looking at the job and saying, there's no way it's going to take 15 to set up. Maybe I can set this up in 10 minutes. That brings it down a little bit more. And on the post end, it's going to take me 5 minutes to package it up, do the paperwork, and move on to the next job. So you can see the price has now come down to 81 cents, my cost to produce each coaster as opposed to that original cost, which is over $2. So this helps you kind of go play with the variables and see where can I tweak the cost down, okay? You know, I can maybe go back and work on my overhead to get that $30 per hour down somewhere, all right? But it's going to take a lot of work up here to make that happen because there's a lot of numbers up here, all right? So the reality is when we're looking at jobs, and really not just at jobs, because what you want to do is build a price sheet. When you build a price sheet, you're going to base it on substrates. You're really going to try and come up with your pricing for coasters, pricing for metal photo panels, pricing for t-shirts, pricing for flip-flops, etc., okay? And you can use this to kind of work through and figure out what things cost to produce in different quantities. Remember, big items are one at a time. Smaller items are 2, 3, 4, 6 at a time, okay? Depending on your printer. You got the SGA 100, you might be doing a dozen, okay? You might be doing a dozen of these at a time. You could probably do a dozen coasters easy on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, and you can see that it brings it down even more. So, you know, this is sort of a calculation type of thing of you being able to go and play with numbers. Keep that in mind as you play with it. Now, the reality is, as you can see already, if I can do more pieces at the same time, it brings it down. But anything that reduces the setup and post-production time is useful. And bigger quantities will be cheaper per piece to produce. And the reason is if you try to kind of just see it in your head, like on a straight line graph, on the left side it says, you know, pre-production setup time. The middle says runtime, and then the far right says post-production downtime. So it's downtime, runtime, downtime. If you can extend that runtime wider on that line graph, that means there's more time between downtime, okay? And that's what you really want. So 144 pieces is going to have a setup time and a whole lot of runtime before you have more downtime. So your goal is to increase your runtime and decrease your downtime, okay, any way that you can. So when you do multiple piece jobs, you will do that. You will get into sort of a groove, as we say, where you're getting really efficient. You're just going, you know, cycle after cycle after cycle, and you're really pushing stuff out the door, as opposed to a lot of small piece orders where, you know, it's set up, run, breakdown, set up, run, breakdown, set up, run, you know, that type of thing, okay? All right, so let's go over here and let's look at this final one. And what I've done on the final one is, I call this my retail price calculations. I'm going to introduce a little bit more in here, okay? Basically, this is the one we were just looking at, the sheet we were just looking at, with a couple of extra things, but also with more columns because I put in quantity, because most people want to figure out quantity price breaks. And this takes into account those efficiency factors, so that as you have more quantity, you will see it costs less per piece. Now, this is not what you show the customer. This is not something you print out for the customer. This is something you use to calculate out numbers that you will then load into a price sheet somewhere, okay? Now, my first quantity was 1 to 6. I chose that. You choose whatever you want, okay? 7 to 12, 13 to 24, et cetera, across the top. A lot of times with quantity breakdowns, you go look at your supplier, and you see where they give you price breaks so that you can kind of do the same, you know, columns, ranges up here, to reflect the price breaks you're getting in there, because you will be putting in your substrate costs down here, okay? So you'll go through the same way. You're going to look at, and remember, different products may have a different production time. So this is a per product. This is not a across the board, okay? If you're doing ceramics, they take longer to run than a lot of the other ones, because they typically, you've got to heat them for a longer period of time. Okay, if you're doing coffee mugs, for example, on a mug press, it may be 3 to 5 minutes for pressing. If you're doing coffee mugs in a convection oven, it might be 12 to 15 minutes. But by the same token, in a big convection oven, you might have a dozen coffee mugs in there. So that really kind of averages out to 1 minute. But, you know, so there's lots of variables here. So you would take this and work through the numbers for each different product, taking into account all the production variables and everything else that goes with it. And one thing I want you to pay attention to is your number of pieces. I got a range here up here of 1 to 6, but I use number 3 because it's the midpoint. There is a big difference in producing 1 piece versus 6. 6 are actually a lot cheaper to produce than 1, I hate to tell you, okay? I use the middle there. Your first category, you may rather use 1 to 3 pieces It just depends on your business. If you're doing a lot of personalization, then you probably want to look at your first category being 1 to 3 pieces, and using maybe 2 as the midpoint, however you want to do that. So just kind of keep that in mind if you want where you want to do your calculation based off of. So we got our pre-production, our post-production there. All these are the same down here. There's our hourly overhead. Everything's the same as what we just looked at. Now here's, as we get further down, I put in, of course, the substrate cost of shipping and all that, but I added something else, and that was credit card processing fees. If people pay you with a credit card, you pay a percentage back to the credit card company. You should take that into account. Now, according to the credit card companies, you're not supposed to have a separate line item on an invoice for credit card charges. They say you're not supposed to have separate charge, for using a credit card. So keep them happy and just build it into your margins, okay? So once this goes through and calculates everything, including your margin, I have down here at the bottom where you can put in a credit card percentage, and make sure you know what that is. If you're using merchant services with a bank, a lot of times they have different percentages based on different variables. For example, did you swipe the card that you were holding in your hand versus somebody gave you a number over the phone? Okay, uses a different percentage based on security risk is what it kind of comes down to. So I have that factored in here too, so you can take it, under advisement when you're really figuring out your prices. So this is something that can help you out. It takes time. I didn't do this overnight. I spent a long time building this out and figuring it out, and you may want to modify it for your business because every business is a little different. And I thought a lot of people look at it and say, okay, well, we run our business like this. Okay, well, there's some new variables that have to be introduced, and work through. So I understand that. This is just sort of a starting point to help you. And if you get comfortable with understanding what's going on here, then you can actually start modifying it to what makes sense for your particular business.